I told my daughter I could not wait for her wedding tomorrow. That was the message I sent, simple, warm, full of the kind of hope a mother carries quietly, a hope I should have known better than to hold. My name is Evelyn Marchand. I am 68. That morning, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had already steamed the soft silver dress I planned to wear, the one with the soft sleeves that made me feel elegant without trying too hard. The wrapped wedding gift sat on my counter, a small crystal vase I had chosen because Lila always loved the way sunlight caught inside glass. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe we were finding our way back to each other. Lila's childhood had been marked by distant divorce, long work shifts, misunderstandings that hardened into silence, but recently she had sounded different, softer, more willing to talk. When she invited me to her bridal shower 2 months ago, I took it as a sign that we were slowly repairing what had fractured between us. So when I texted her, "I can't wait for tomorrow," I meant it. I wanted to stand in the back row and watch her begin a life she had dreamed about since she was little. I wanted her to see me there, to know I had not walked away from her, even when things felt impossible. The reply arrived 30 seconds later, though it felt like it hit me in slow motion. "Mom, the wedding was last week." At first, my mind tried to rearrange the words into something that made sense. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and waited for my phone to correct itself, as if it might say, "Sorry, wrong message," or "I meant rehearsal," or anything that did not shatter the ground beneath me. But the message stayed exactly as it was. My breath tightened. Something inside me shifted, not with noise, but with a quiet heaviness that felt final. I stared at the dress, the gift, the red circle on my calendar. After several minutes, sitting in stunned silence, I finally reached for my keys. I sat in the car for a long moment before I could make myself move. The phone was still in my hand, the message still glowing on the screen. I unlocked it again, as if the words might have changed while I blinked. They hadn't. I opened social media, needing proof, needing something solid to hold on to. I'd heard vague mentions of wedding preparations from relatives, but no one ever told me the actual date. Ivory lace, a soft train, her hair pulled back the way she always liked for special events. She looked radiant. She looked happy. And she looked complete. Without me painfully complete. My thumb drifted down the screen. Photo after photo appeared Lila with her bridesmaids. Lila with Robert, my ex-husband, his hand proudly on her shoulder, my sister, my nieces. Even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years stood gathered in a perfect row, dressed in coordinated blues. They were all smiling, laughing, posing as if nothing in the world had been left out of place. There was a video, too. I tapped it before I could stop myself. Robert stood at the microphone, holding a glass. "Thank you to everyone who mattered," he said, his voice full and warm. "Everyone who stood by her. Everyone who helped her become the woman she is today." A cheer rose behind him. People clapped. Lila wiped a tear. There was no empty seat, no hesitation in his voice, no pause where a mother might have been acknowledged. The screen blurred for a second before I realized my hand was shaking. I whispered, "You didn't even think of me." Saying it out loud didn't make it any less true. The next image showed the father-daughter dance. Lila rested her head on Robert's shoulder, smiling through the soft lights. He looked proud, so proud that I wondered if he had convinced himself I'd never existed at all. I closed the app with a slow breath. The silence in the car felt different now, less like shock, more like a truth settling where denial used to live. There was only one place left to go. I started the engine and headed toward Sparks, toward the house where my daughter would have to tell me to my face. Lila opened the door only halfway. like she wasn't sure whether to let me in or pretend she wasn't home. "Mom, you could have called," she said, her voice tight. "I got your message," I replied. "I think we need to talk." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped back, letting me into the familiar living room she now shared with her father on weekends. Robert sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if it held the answers he didn't want to give. I didn't bother sitting. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice came out steady, but it felt like my ribs were shaking. Lila crossed her arms. It was a small wedding. Small, I lifted the phone, showing her the photos I had just seen. There were at least 40 people there. She flinched but kept her chin high. It was intimate. Less stressful this way. Less stressful for who I asked. For everyone, she said quickly, as if she had rehearsed it. Dad thought Robert cut her off with a quiet Lila. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I turned to him. "You stood up there and thanked everyone who mattered." He swallowed hard. "Evelyn?" It was her day. We didn't want conflict. Conflict. My voice cracked. Showing up for my daughter is conflict now. Lila's jaw tightened. "Mom, you can be overwhelming. Like when you kept pressing about the engagement finances last spring. You always want explanations, and I didn't want that energy, so you hid the date," I said. "You let me prepare. Buy a gift. Press a dress just so I wouldn't show up and overwhelm you." "That's not what I said." She snapped. "It's exactly what you meant." Robert finally lifted his head. But only for a second. We made a choice. "It felt easier to erase me," I said softly. No one answered. The silence settled heavy in the room, thick with something that had clearly been here long before today. Lila looked past me, already done with the conversation. Robert's shoulders sagged, as if he'd been waiting years for this confrontation and still wished it wasn't happening. I took one slow breath, letting the truth land without fighting it. If they didn't want me in their lives, they had certainly never minded taking what I offered. I drove toward Lake Tahoe without turning on the radio. The silence felt cleaner than the conversation I'd just walked out of. Every mile put more distance between me and that living room full of excuses. By the time I reached the cabin, the late afternoon light had begun to dim. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me, letting the quiet settle against my skin. No accusations, no careful tones, no one deciding who I was allowed to be, just me. I dropped my purse on the small table near the entry. The floor gave its familiar creak, the same sound it made the summer I spent restoring this place alone. I'd painted every wall myself, replaced the cabinet hinges, scrubbed the porch until my back ached. Lila never came to help. Robert always had a reason he couldn't drive up. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I liked doing things alone. Now the truth sat sharper in my chest. I'd been alone because it was convenient for everyone else. I sank into the nearest chair, letting the weight of that settle. "You've given too much," I whispered to myself. Saying it felt like acknowledging something I'd buried for decades. My eyes drifted across the room to the corner where I kept the storage boxes, paperwork, receipts, tax forms, old letters. I'd shoved them there over the years, promising I'd review everything eventually. I never did. I always assumed things were the way my family said they were. Shared, equal, fair. But this cabin, I bought this cabin with my own savings after the divorce. No one else ever helped pay for it. Truly mine. I exhaled slowly and reached for the first box. If I wanted answers, they weren't in Sparks. They were right here, waiting for me on this wooden floor. I pulled the first box onto the table and opened it without ceremony. Dust lifted in a thin cloud, settling on my sleeves. But I didn't bother brushing it off. Inside were tax statements going back more than 20 years. Every one of them carried my name. Every one of them listed the cabin as my responsibility. I whispered the numbers under my breath, remembering each year I'd paid them without thinking twice. I told myself it was normal, that families shared the load in different ways. Next came the repair invoices, roof fixes, plumbing leaks, winter preparation services, a $1,500 pest control bill I barely recalled authorizing. I flipped the pages, and with each new line, my penmanship stared back at me. Every signature was mine. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from clarity. I had been the one holding this place together literally and figuratively, while everyone else treated it like a vacation spot they could drift in and out of. I reached for another stack. Insurance renewals from the past decade, all paid on time, all under my accounts. The papers were shoved in without order, but even in the chaos, every document still carried only my name. I opened my old message thread with Robert, scrolling through years I had ignored. Evelyn, I'm short on this month's expenses. Could you help just until the end of the week? Another message from a different year. Lila's school trip fee came sooner than expected. Can you cover it temporarily? I'll repay you next month. They never repaid me, and I never asked. I scrolled further, the pattern impossible to ignore. Every temporary request became permanent. Every promise evaporated the moment the crisis passed. I had filled in the cracks of their lives, smoothing everything so seamlessly that none of them ever saw the effort. A laugh escaped me, short and humorless. You built your stability on me, I murmured. For the first time, I felt the shape of my role clearly. Not mother, not ex-wife, not relative, safety net. The kind people only noticed when it disappeared. I closed the last folder and let my hands rest on the table. If I stepped away from that role now, if I finally chose myself, the gap would belong to them, not me. A month passed without a word from Lila. Not a call, not a text, not even a message pretending to explain what she'd done. The silence told its own story, and I stopped expecting anything different. Then, late one afternoon, someone knocked on the cabin door. When I opened it, Lila stood on the porch with her new husband, Evan, hovering just behind her. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said brightly. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by." I leaned against the doorframe. "You were an hour away from home and decided you were in the area." Her smile stiffened. Evan cleared his throat. "We wanted to see how you were doing that." So I asked. Lila stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around like she was already imagining herself here. "The place looks great. You've kept it up so well. I always have," I said. She nodded quickly, as if she didn't want the comment to land. "Mom, we actually need to talk to you about something." Evan shifted beside her. His voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "We've been under a lot of pressure lately," Lila cut in. "A lot of pressure? And we desperately need space. Time away. A reset." I crossed my arms, and Lila inhaled, bracing for what she clearly thought was a reasonable request. "Mom, I know things were tense," she said quickly, avoiding a real apology, "but we were hoping we could use the cabin. Just for a week or two, a private getaway. It would help us so much." There it was. No apology, no acknowledgement, just expectation. Evan added softly, "It would mean a lot." I looked at them. My daughter asking for comfort in the very place she avoided me. The same place she pretended wasn't mine. The weight of entitlement settled fully. Finally, where I couldn't ignore it. For the first time, the word I'd never dared to use sat ready on my tongue. Lila waited for my answer with the same confidence she'd carried since childhood, the certainty that I'd adjust, absorb, or rearrange myself to make things easier for her. Evan watched me carefully, sensing something in the air she didn't. I straightened my shoulders. "No," I said. The cabin isn't available to you. For a second, Lila didn't react. The word didn't seem to register. Then her eyebrows shot up. What do you mean? No, I mean no, I repeated. You can't stay here. Her voice sharpened. Mom, we're going through a lot. You know that. I do, I said, but that doesn't change my answer. She stared at me as if the rules of our universe had suddenly malfunctioned. You've never said no to me, I know. So why now? Her face flushed. Because of the wedding. You're punishing me. I kept my tone steady. I'm choosing what's healthy for me. That's ridiculous. She snapped. This is family. Evan placed a hand on her arm. Lila. She jerked away. Don't. She pointed at me. You've always helped us, she snapped. I thought you'd do it again. I don't owe you anything, I said quietly. Not the cabin. Not my silence. Not my absence. The room felt smaller, tighter, as her anger pushed against every corner. You're being dramatic, she said. You know we need this. You know we're struggling. I can hear that you're struggling, I said, but I won't fix it for you. This isn't fixing, Lila insisted. It's just a week. No, I said again. It's never just a week. Her jaw trembled, not from sadness, but from disbelief. I can't believe you're doing this. Evan stepped forward. Maybe we should go. Lila didn't look away from me. Fine. If you want to make things harder, go ahead. I opened the door. Take care of yourselves. She brushed past me, shaking with anger. Evan gave me a tight, apologetic nod before following her out. When the door closed, my knees felt weak, but something inside me settled like a bone finally set in the right place after years out of alignment. A storm had started the moment I said no, and I knew more were coming. The fallout arrived faster than I expected, though I'd stopped measuring time by their rhythms. A week after Lila stormed out of the cabin, Robert called me. I let it ring twice before answering. He didn't bother with greetings. Evelyn, the refinancing on my house didn't go through. They said my income alone isn't enough. I kept my voice even. I see. You used to help with this, he said, frustration leaking through. You always helped. I won't be involved this time. There was a beat of silence, then a long exhale. Fine. He hung up without another word. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt outside of it, for once. 2 days later, my niece Brooke sent a message. Aunt Evelyn, I heard something happened with Lila's wedding. Is everything all right? Her words were careful, like she was approaching a wound she didn't understand. When I told her only the truth, no bitterness, just simple facts, she responded. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I believed her. What spread after that wasn't gossip. It was awareness, a quiet shift. Family members who once assumed I was overreacting started asking Lila small, measured questions. I could tell by the abrupt silence on her end of the group thread. She didn't like being pressed. Not when the story she curated began to fray at the edges. Then Evan called. His voice was strained. I think we need space, he said. She won't talk to me about anything. She shuts down or changes the subject. I didn't say much. I didn't offer comfort or solutions. That was our old pattern. And I wasn't stepping into it again. She's been tense since the wedding, he said quietly. Every conversation turns into an argument, but I'm starting to think this started long before the cabin. I didn't answer, and he didn't push. He thanked me for listening and ended the call. I sat alone afterward, hands folded in my lap. There was no satisfaction in any of it, only a steady, widening clarity. They were finally carrying the weight that had never belonged to me. The days that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not quiet from loneliness, but quiet that felt earned. I woke early, made tea, and stood by the window watching the water shift with the light. One morning, I took out the old watercolor set I'd kept tucked in a drawer since Lila was a child. I dipped the brush into blue and let it move without planning anything. The colors blended softly, like my mind was learning how to unclench. By the end of the week, I'd managed a few tentative strokes across 4 pages, simple, unremarkable, but each one felt like a small breath returning. On my walks along the trail behind the cabin, memories surfaced unpredictably. Some hurt sharply, others gently. I allowed myself to remember the version of Lila I had imagined, warm, open, wanting me near even if it had never fully existed. I'd spent decades trying to earn a place that was never truly offered. One evening, I sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook and wrote a list. Not of tasks or obligations, but rules. No more loans. No more temporary help. No more rearranging myself to make others comfortable. No more pretending silence is peace. No more giving more than I can afford to lose. I stared at the page, the ink drying beneath my hand, and felt the shape of something shift inside me. This was the beginning of a different life, one where I belonged to myself first. A text from Brooke appeared on my phone later that night. "Thinking of you, Aunt Evelyn. Let me know if you ever want company up there." I smiled at the message. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, just sincerity. At sunset, I stepped onto the deck and let the cool air wash over me. The lake was steady, unbothered, reflecting the sky without distortion. For so long, I'd looked at that water and seen responsibilities, repairs, the weight of being needed. Now, I saw something else, something honest, something that didn't ask me to shrink or stretch or bend. It simply mirrored whatever stood before it. And for the first time, I liked the reflection. If this story made you pause or see a piece of your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tap like, leave a comment, or subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.